Welcome to the Great Distraction.
Welcome back, everyone. This is The Great Distraction, and today the topic of discussion is marijuana prohibition. My name is Ben, and with me today are my co-host Thomas.
Aloha.
And Glenn.
Howdy, folks.
If this is your first time listening, welcome. We thank you for joining us. The Great Distraction is a podcast that focuses on a vast and random range of topics, and we hope that each episode leaves you with, if nothing else, just a little something to ponder for the rest of your day, and possibly the rest of the week until the next episode comes out. You never know how long that'll last you. Marijuana prohibition. With respect to the United States, we're not really going to talk about other countries, though our neighbor country, Mexico, dealt with very much the same type of stuff, obviously with different details, but they definitely went through their time period of dealing with this that extended, I don't know, a couple hundred years. I didn't look into their history too much, but anyway.
And didn't it just end, a prohibition end in Canada?
Something like that. Yeah, I didn't even look. I didn't look north either. I
believe they are totally legal up there now.
Wow.
The whole country?
Yeah.
Wow.
Makes going to Ottawa a lot more enjoyable.
That's wow. Yeah, I had heard, and again I don't know anything about it. I had heard that the areas that are more prone to speaking French, they had like held off the longest, and I didn't know. Yeah, I thought they were still not legalizing it, but yeah. Crazy. I mean, it's inevitable. It's going to be legal everywhere. It's just a matter of a few years now. It's coming down to the end. But anyway, I've been curious about it for a while and researching this, little bit of a history to start us off with. Well, actually quite a bit of history, but nevertheless, I thought it was really interesting to find out how much of a history this stuff, cannabis, had in our culture in this country. And I found it extremely surprising how far back and how far embedded it was from the very start. All the way back to 1619, King James I had American colonists of Jamestown grow and send back to England 100 hemp plants on a regular basis with shipments. So, I mean, right off the bat, as soon as they landed here, it was
what was that hemp that they were using for manufacturing or making ropes and things like that? Because I mean, at this point, if you don't know that most of those ropes back then were made of hemp, you're not paying attention.
Or that hemp was an extremely useful resource in textile.
Absolutely.
And will always be.
And you can't smoke hemp.
Yeah, it doesn't have THC, but nevertheless, it was very important. It was one of the
was.
first things that they said, get here, get crops growing, let's get it moving.
I feel like at one point in time, it was probably like pine is in America.
Probably.
You know, I mean, it's a super easy, fast-growing resource that has a ton of usage, and for a long time in history, that was a mainstay crop.
Yeah, and if you didn't know that, I guess maybe Thomas is right. I should have included that differentiation right from the start. And Glenn, please help me if I say this wrong. Hemp is a version of cannabis that does not flower and could therefore contain THC. Is that correct? No.
It's more of a cousin.
Oh, it's a cousin. It's not even okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
it's they're close.
Okay. So hemp is an extremely useful textile, but it is bunched in the prohibition of marijuana, the illegalization of marijuana with all other forms of marijuana.
I know you can crossbreed them though.
Okay.
So I don't know where that puts it in as
far
as the animal kingdom scale.
Yeah, but as far as legalization goes, when they banned it, they banned hemp along with it, which you can't smoke. It doesn't do anything.
And I think we're going to get into that as we go into this, but I think that was on purpose.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's the reason that...
It's a way bigger story.
Give me a second here. Whoa.
Slow your roll.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Slow your roll.
Let's see here. Let's see. Yes, and later, so we're still in 1619 here. Later, they grew it to support.
Doesn't feel like 16.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. No, it's 2019, right? But, yeah. Later, they grew it to support the expansion of America, where it played a major role in establishing this country. The cannabis plant, this blew me away, was even on the $10 bill as late as 1900. Dude, that's nuts. It was on the money. That's how important that plant was to this country. George Washington grew hemp as one of the 3 primary crops at Mount Vernon. Cannabis was introduced into the American pharmacies in 1839 and became widespread somewhere around the 1850s from my research. So it was in, and I guess you would call that medical marijuana, in the 1850s in pharmacies. Around the 1860s, a few states tried to label it as a poison due to laws that required labels of certain substances sold in pharmacies. But since cannabis didn't have a normal category at the time, they kind of just bunched it in with quote-unquote poison.
I feel like that's been the wrongful history of marijuana.
It just continues
More
from
and
there.
more and more.
Yes. By the let's see here. By the 1880s, 1880s, Oriental-style hashish parlors were doing as well as opium dens, and they could be found in every major city on the East Coast. And there was apparently an estimated 500 in New York City alone.
Crazy, right?
And for those who don't know, there used to be, and I don't know a lot about the history of them, opium dens. And opium dens were tents that were set up open to the public like a business where you could go in there and smoke opium. That's what it was. You just went in there, got high on a very addictive substance.
I feel like these were the good old days.
So apparently they tried to do the same thing with marijuana, or they did do the same thing with marijuana, wherein they had these hashish tents. And you could go, into your town and go get high in a tent, in a big ass hot box tent, and then come out and you were at least not addicted to a opioid. So yeah. Anyway, moving along, 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act was passed, and this forced accurate labeling of patent medicines, no secret ingredients or misleading labels anymore. In 1910, this got modified to strengthen the requirements for the sale of narcotics. And quote-unquote narcotics included listing cannabis as another form of narcotic and poison. And it was cross-listed. Let's see, and this limited sales, but effectively what this did is it limited sales to pharmacies only and required a prescription for it to be purchased. So now they had some control over it. Which was actually what they were after at that point, was a way to control the distribution and control the sale. That act was later updated to the Federal Pure Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, which is still in effect today. And that moved, effectively what that did is it moved the control over to the Food and Drug Administration. So now the FDA has had control of it. And we know from our exposure to the pharmaceutical industry, we know the FDA to be a completely ethical entity who cares for nothing but our well-being. So once they gained control of it, they did just the best thing for all of the people in this country.
Yeah, they did.
From there, it just spread state to state, being restricted as either a poison or a habit-forming drug. They restricted sales and made it harder and harder to obtain legally. This kind of started the whole downturn of, or I guess it depends on how you look at it, the whole growth of control of the substance by the government.
Well, then you got to throw in, the propaganda like Reefer Madness.
That came later. We're still in the 30s, dude.
I thought Reefer Madness was in the 30s.
Maybe it was. I'm sorry. I didn't even catch that. I
thought it was like 50s.
Really? I feel like it was way further than that.
Look it up while I'm reading
Let's
the rest
Google
of
it, bro.
Okay.
Bro. Let's see. 1930 brought us the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which aimed to remove all recreational drugs, the head of which claimed cannabis caused people to, I love this. This is what this guy said publicly. He said, caused people to commit violent crimes and act irrationally and overly sexual.
That sounds like Reefer Madness.
Overly sexual.
1936.
Nice.
Okay, that was in 1930. Well, 1930.
That was right around the time of Prohibition because we have to remember that alcohol prohibition plays a definite role in the prohibition of weed. Just throwing that out there.
Absolutely. And 36 would be right along my timeline here because in 1937, they passed the Marijuana Tax Act. And this is kind of, I don't know, for me it was a little confusing to understand what their angle was with this, but it effectively made the possession or transfer of marijuana illegal. And it required government or local government or whatever, registration, fees, and tracking for anyone selling or growing, and by which after the government had that, they knew who was doing this and they could control who could legally possess cannabis. It's worth noting that the American Medical Association, AMA, opposed this is it meant that they could no longer prescribe medical marijuana. So they were like, yeah, dude, what you're cutting into our pay here, buddy. Yeah. This was a point when many claimed the main goal was simply to destroy the hemp industry, because this portion, the Marijuana Tax Act and the preceding political angles, were spearheaded by Hearst Newspapers, or the owner of Hearst Newspapers, rather, and the DuPont family. And doing more research into that, it appears that Hearst, which at the time was the wealthiest man in the world, I believe, had massive debts with Canadian paper manufacturers. And hemp was a threat to them, because to what was being used to make paper back then, and at the same time was deeply in bed with DuPont for the development of nylon, which was another synthetic material that they were looking into for a possible paper substance. So obviously DuPont didn't want hemp growing up because it is a way better material to use for paper manufacturing. Then the passing of this act was kind of a slide by, as I understood it. There was very little opposition and very little representation. Nobody showed up for a lot of the meetings and the hearings, as my research goes. And in 1969, the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 was found to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So obviously, if they wanted to continue controlling it, they needed a new avenue. And that brought us, from our good old buddy Nixon, brought us the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act of 1970.
Which also led to the organization of the DEA.
Yes, brought us the Controlled Substance Act, which then, I believe, that portion of that subsidiary of it led to the formation of the DEA.
Yeah, well, the configuration of the DEA basically swallowed about half a dozen other entities into that, and that was part of Nixon's, quote unquote, war on drugs.
War on drugs, which continued into the Reagan industry, right?
Yep. Oh, Nancy.
The other thing it did, which we should all be familiar with, is it created this Schedule list of drugs that we hear about, and of which Schedule 1 drugs are the baddies, and for some odd reason, cannabis is added to that Schedule 1 category, classification, whatever you want to call it, and is still there federally, because that's a federally controlled list. Let's see. It also started a whole slew of other law changes as they bounced around ways of making marijuana illegal. It basically just it opened the gates for them, and they just went a whole bunch of different ways in figuring out how they can make illegal marijuana. The legality hit ahead in 1986. I see. When the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 reinstated mandatory prison sentences for the possession of marijuana. Once they had that laid out, they could begin filling our prisons for new laws that they had created that did not deserve imprisonment. And if you're interested in more of that, we dedicated a whole episode to privatized prisons, which does talk a lot about the ridiculous nature of America and putting people in prison. For those that don't know, we actually imprison more of our citizens than any other country in the world by far. That's episode 47, if you're curious about that. Check it out. We thought it was pretty interesting. That's why we...
That's a good episode.
Yeah, that's why we discussed it. So, with all of that background laid out, and I hope that didn't put you to sleep. It was only 13 minutes or so. I wanted to start off our conversation breaking it into two parts, and wherever it goes from there, as per usual. And the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what do you guys think about this? Let's look at medicinal marijuana first. How has the legalization of medicinal marijuana changed our society? But before we say that, let's throw out there. In 1996, the first state, which was California, legalized medicinal marijuana. Now, a total of 33 states have legalized it. So how did medicinal marijuana change society? I mean,
it brought the use more back into the forefront of the public mind.
Definitely.
So it kind of got the ball rolling in.
It opened people's eyes.
Sure.
To the concept that this stuff could actually be what it's been used for centuries. Some help.
Well, I think one thing you have to consider is in the industrial era of America, we have all these entities that wanted to control things because they wanted to produce different products. And so anything that was a competition to their products, just like the paper thing with William Randolph Hearst, became an issue because it was more about making money. And I think one of the things that has happened since we've started to divulge ourselves back into the world of medical cannabis use is we're starting to re-educate people who have been brainwashed for half a century or more that there are actually practical uses for a plant in a medical situation. And, no matter what you believe, there are plenty of things on this planet that grow naturally that are very useful for us, plants, flowers, everything else. So I think the introduction into the medical marijuana usage sort of opens up the door to the fact that, like, wait a minute, we have a lot of things that aren't controlled by the big pharmacy companies that are useful to us that can be explored into better, more natural remedies for health.
Yeah, and like a lot of people will take I can never think of the name of it. Non-FDA approved. All
right, what's that word?
Damn it! What's that?
I always forget that. I always say it wrong.
What are you guys trying to say?
Drugs that are not approved by the FDA. Well, they're not drugs. They're
Supplements?
well, I guess you could call them supplements. There's holistic.
Holistic, that's the word I'm looking for, sorry.
Holistic medications.
We are absolutely tongue-tied today.
Yeah, dude, this has been tough. I mentioned
Mine's
last
related to all the beer, but
I don't have that excuse. It's just a new setting where we're recording and it's kind of throwing me off a little bit. But anyway.
But yeah, the holistic medicine. So
Yes.
that's a big thing because that's kind of my argument before is like we are exploring, we're a little more welcoming, especially in places like California, to options of medication and going back into the things that we've used as human beings on this planet. We've used fruits, plants, vegetables, all kinds of things for centuries for other usages. And when the industrial era came in and all of a sudden there's like DuPont or Dow or all these other companies or Eli Lilly, all these companies, they want to control things and hey, you don't need to use that anymore. You need to buy our product.
Yeah, we don't want you using something you can grow in your backyard or pick up at the local
because we don't make any money.
Supermarket. No, we want you using our crap that only we know the secret sauce. It's Szechuan, by the way.
Szechuan sauce. Yeah. But for me, I think that the introduction for California in the 90s with the medical marijuana is sort of opening up the idealism to like, hey, wait a minute, we do have other options out here. And there's a lot of people, I'm definitely in this group of people, I don't even like taking aspirins. I don't like any sort of medication. I do not take any sort of opiates.
I take no prescription
drugs
unless
at
I'm
all.
really sick and need, like if I need an antibiotic or something, that's different. I don't take anything regularly.
Yeah, and I don't understand the abuse of those drugs. I think they're ridiculous, and I have tons of friends who are, they have other problems too, but a lot of friends who are alcoholics use and abuse those sort of drugs as well. I don't believe in any of those things. I don't want to poison myself with that kind of crap. I don't believe in it. I worked at a motorcycle shop years ago, and the guy who owned the business was a pharmaceutical engineer for Eli Lilly.
What the hell?
And he was a really cool guy, and he told me a lot of crazy little stories. And for about a 10-year period of time, he lived in Russia because there was almost no regulations to development of different drugs and
Mother Russia
the
don't
usage.
care about that.
They don't care as long as you're giving them money. Wow. And there's a lot of countries that welcome that sort of practice and R&D for those sort of drug companies.
Test on humans? Come over here.
Absolutely.
Over here,
so there's a lot of countries out there, and a lot of the big pharmaceutical companies, if you don't know this, they use and abuse these rights to these other countries and send to engineers, chemical engineers to these countries because they have the freedom to test on animals. They have the freedom to test things that in America we're not really all that cool with.
Yep.
Third world countries where they can get away with things.
Absolutely.
So you have an industry that has been using that as a scapegoat to develop products that they can sell you that all have horrible side effects because they don't want you using natural remedies. And I think now that we've entered the 21st century, a lot more people are saying, hey, wait a minute, we don't want to take a bunch of horrible prescription drugs. What are our other options?
Yeah, and as it continued opening people's eyes, that you would get. I've noticed from just the people I've talked to about it over the years since medical marijuana had become legal, you get the mentality of take the lesser option, the one with less risks, before you begin moving up the chain of whatever as far as drugs go, prescription drugs go, or drugs for an ailment goes. So if you have some pain, try an aspirin first before you go straight to morphine, right in the vein. I mean, come on, little steps. So, and as it became legal and started becoming more in the people's minds, it was, hey, you know what? My buddy will give you a sack for free. Smoke this joint. Try it out when your back is killing you. It ain't going to kill you. It ain't going to hurt you. It ain't going to kill you. It's not addictive. It doesn't cost you any money. It might work. You're in pain no matter what. You should be willing to try anything.
Yeah.
See what it does for you,
yeah.
and decide after that.
When I lived in LA, I had my medical marijuana card pretty early on, early 2000s, and in the building that I was in, there was an older guy in the building who was dying of Crohn's disease, and he was a really nice guy, super good, and he couldn't eat. And one of the biggest problems was he couldn't eat, and it caused a lot of problems for him in his general health because he wasn't eating. He was a smoker for many, many years, and they were like, "You're going to die. We're not going to tell you to not smoke, but it's not helping the situation." And he was like, "Yeah, I get it." And he backed off a little bit, but not much. We would hang out, and I was like, "Norm, I'm going to give you a joint. I'm going to roll your joint," and I would give him weed. And he's dead now, so he can't sue me. And I didn't kill him. He died of Crohn's. He died of Crohn's disease.
Okay. No.
Anyway, so I would give him, because he was a cigarette smoker, so I would give him joints, and he would take a couple puffs off the smoke. Next day, I'd say, "How you doing, Norm?" He's like, "Oh, I feel great." And I was like, "Well, why do you feel great?" He's like, "Well, I smoked a little bit of that joint you gave me, and I ate all my crackers, and I had some chips, and I feel really better." I was like, "'Cause you were eating? You had an appetite?" And he was like, "Yeah, I finally could eat." And so for a lot of years, like my dad's in his 80s, and my dad has this opinion that any drug out there is dope. And this is a mentality.
It encompasses all drugs, right?
Everything. And this is a mentality that I'm hoping slowly disappears.
It is.
And it is disappearing.
It's in that age group.
It is. And it's totally based on age. But everything that you do is dope. Oh, that's a dope. And my dad is like, "Oh, you're a doper. You do this. You're a doper.
You're smoking that dope, boy."
But the funny thing about it is my dad's very into holistic medicines and options outside of the big pharmas. And I'm like, well, why don't I know? And I'm like, why don't you entertain the option of marijuana? But he still is from the mentality of the age where he was born in the 30s. It's dope. So it's that thing.
The government brainwashing.
It's the government brainwashing. So one of the things I think is really cool, and as we said before, is as we're moving forward with legalization of marijuana, the mentality of how we look at this drug is changing, and more people are going, you know what, it's really not that big a deal. And I think as the mentality starts to change and we're welcoming it, I mean, there's a lot of really good health organizations and scientific groups who want to study the effects of things that involve marijuana, but they can't because they're restricted.
We need that so
We
bad.
need that a lot. And you're always going to get a pushback from big pharmaceutical companies because that's going to cut into their profits.
Yeah, well, that too. But as far as when they start studying these things, a lot of times the pharmaceutical companies are the ones that financially back the entities that do the studies.
Well, they got to get on the next big thing.
That's right.
If you can't beat them, join them. And the way to join them is get control over it.
Yep. And if not, and a lot of times they are the financial backers that keeps that lab open. Now some of the universities that get funded by the students paying money there and grants and other stuff like that, federal grants and stuff of that around that nature, so private grants, they're the ones that hopefully will produce a more unbiased or I don't want to say jaded, but uncontrolled by some other entity that's looking for a commercial investment studies out of their labs, and those are the ones we want. Those are also the ones right now
the non-biased.
Hopefully, I mean, that's the idea behind letting those university labs do that study, I guess. Right now, it's a real big thing for those particular types of labs that are gaining more access to other controlled substances for testing, like MDMA, psilocybin. Those are two hot ones right now. And I've even heard that the grip is loosening on LSD for testing. I've heard that there's a lot more lab medical testing that they're allowing to be done again, and that's hugely important. These types of, especially marijuana, these types of substances are way, way, way too influential, way too powerful, way too important to be left alone. They need to be studied.
Yeah, but I mean, you also have that. If a federal restriction, and as long as it's a class, what is it again?
Schedule
one.
Yeah.
Schedule one. As long as that exists, there is always going to be this federal level of like, you can't do this. So a lot of organizations or funding for things are not going to be given because regardless of what your state says, this is still...
Or your findings. Your statings or your findings, yes.
But it's still a federal offense because this is a Schedule 1
So from what I've been reading, and again, I'm not in the industry, so I can't speak to how true it is. The ones that are giving the approvals and allowing the studying to be done is the federal government that are allowing these entities to get these substances. It's not necessary. I'm sure that these labs are going through whatever avenue they can utilize to get the substances to test on them. So be it, hey, our state says it's legal, but the federal government says it isn't. I'm willing to bet they would go through the state if they can to get the substance, right? But as far as I understand it, these are federally sanctioned disbursements of
Well, if
these
they're getting
substances.
any sort of grants or anything, they also have regulations that they have to
True.
to
So
follow.
it's not completely unbiased, right? But
No, yeah.
they got to get the money to keep the lab open and pay the people to work there, somewhere. But you're right. Yeah.
which is kind of a shitter.
But that it is the norm of things, right? Because somebody's got to fund this research. No matter what, and it is unfortunate that a lot of times the funding entity has some say or manipulation of the situation, and that's
it can even go down as far as like a lot of grants and funding are based on like an individual. So if you have funding from, say, a very wealthy person and maybe they're 75, 80 years old and they feel the same way my dad felt, they're not going to give any money if you're using a Schedule I drug to do any sort of development or research in.
That would be interesting to see as a breakdown of, and I'm sure it would probably be on lab by lab basis or whatever, but an individual breakdown, a breakdown of what the individual donators or funders are, like what portion of them are from the federal government, what portion that funds this lab is from a private entity, and what are the interests of that private entity, and what portion of this is from a pharmaceutical company. It's like I'd like to see who's actually funding these studies.
Where's the money coming from?
That's right. Now, exactly? That's what I want to know. And then I can pass judgment on whether or not I believe that entity is truly in it for the, truly being transparent.
Well, it's like the tobacco industry saying their scientists found no harm in smoking cigarettes.
Nope, and cell phones don't cause us cancer, right? There's no proof of this.
We at the tobacco industry have discovered that smoking cigarettes has zero effect on your health.
Yep. Yeah, they really did make public statements like that.
Oh, they did.
It's awesome.
They did.
Yeah. All right. So that's where we feel. Oh, okay. And then that's more in how we think it's changed in the medical field and in society in general. What about in your guys' personal lives, of the people that you know? I know I've seen massive changes in some of the people that I know. It's like some people are such damn sheep, and if their government says they can't do so, they should think some way about this. They think that way, and that's all the further they can comprehend to go into it. So in your guys' personal lives, what do you feel has changed? And remember, try and keep this to medical marijuana at this point.
I'd say nothing.
Nothing.
Glenn's on a zero.
Glenn's family was very open-minded in the first place.
I was experienced to it young,
Exposed to it.
Thank you.
But
So
you did
it's-
experience
but
it.
I did experience it young.
He started gaining experience points very young.
Right. Start that grind early.
Winning that game.
Jeez.
As long as your mom wasn't blowing smoke into you while she was breastfeeding.
Right. No, none of that. But,
A little weed butter with the teat.
jeez.
That's funny.
Wow.
It makes him sleepy.
Hey, it's rub whiskey on the gums or blow some smoke in his face.
Wasn't that bad, guys.
I'm just kidding. Anyway.
We're
No,
just joshing you.
Just joshing me. Thank you.
Did you say Josh?
He did.
Nice. That's an oldie but goodie there. Go ahead, Glenn. We're sorry.
Oh, anyway, I had some early exposure, and it's always just been what it is. It's never been a big deal to me, or who I've been around. It's never been an issue. Yeah. So hearing people freak out about cannabis and pot, and it's like, what are you guys tripping about? Wait, this? Like, what?
This weed that grows naturally?
This
you guys
plant.
I never understood it.
Yeah. One of my buddies has a few kids, and one of his kids is a teenager now or whatever. And, growing up, he never stopped smoking pot. And his son ran into it quite a few times, I'm sure. He told me a story one time. He used to go on the side of his house and smoke, and outside in the damn window right above it was his son's window in his bedroom. So he's like, "Yeah, Dad, I knew you were out there smoking," but I don't think that the son ever got super into it. As far as I know, he's never really got into it. It kind of like demystified, right?
Yeah.
he didn't really care. He's like, yeah, my
That's
dad
the
smokes.
word.
Yeah, my dad smokes all the time. I'm not really. I can
Yeah.
smoke if I want. I could probably go down there and ask my dad, hey, Dad, can I have a beer, with you? Or, hey, Dad, can I have a smoke with you? And maybe at some point that will be something that they can do or whatever. Maybe we wait till he turns 18 or whatever.
Well, I think in America, I equate a lot of the weed situation to the alcohol thing. You can't drink alcohol until you're 21. So you restrict something from these kids over and over and over. It's like a rubber band. You just get it tighter and tighter and tighter. You can't have it, can't have it, can't have it. What anybody who's a parent knows, if you tell your kid you can't have something, what does the kid want?
Wait, why can't I have that? Let
Exactly.
me get that. Yeah.
So, this major restriction. And, in America, we've had this horrible stigmatism towards marijuana because of the brainwashing that I feel like started around in the 30s because of those prohibitions.
Yeah.
I grew up in Indiana, so it's a much different environment. My mom grew up in Los Angeles, and she never really smoked when we were younger. My mom doesn't smoke or drink or anything. She's pretty straight edge in general. She's never really drank much. I remember for like a week she smoked cigarettes one time in the 70s because I think everybody else was or something like that. But she was never really into those sort of things, so it was never around. And I've already told you the story about my dad. It wasn't really around that much. But as I got my teenage years and started playing in bands, doing things, of course marijuana popped up. And I didn't really think it was that big a deal, and I never really felt like it was a big deal. But growing up in Indiana, it was one of those things where like it was a very, religious policing kind of event where
make sure the fear of God's in you, boy.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like even today, like if you're in Indiana and you get pulled over and you have a roach or something in your car, which I'm telling you right now, if you're driving, you should just not have anything in your car. I treat it like alcohol. I do it at home or whatever, but it shouldn't be in your car. You shouldn't be driving around smoking weed. You shouldn't be driving around drinking beer.
Yeah.
But if you were to get pulled over in Indiana right now today with a roach or something that you're not smoking, your car doesn't smell like it, it's possible that you would get arrested. That's just the mentality of it. So I grew up with this mentality of like, it's a horrible thing, and you had all these religious Bible Belt people screaming, and it's this horrible entity. It's a gateway drug.
It's the devil's lettuce, dude.
So it's like the reality of it is to see that aspect, and then also living in California for all these years, I'm like, it's ridiculous, and it's that mentality that I think I'm hoping that we're slowly starting to walk away from, but you just had an attorney general with Jeff Sessions, sorry, that was super anti-weed. I mean, he got bumped out. The whole, this whole administration is really screwy. But Jeff Sessions, who was the attorney general for about a year and a half or so, he was very upfront about being anti-weed. And he's an old white guy, which is kind of the way Midwestern old white people are kind of against those things. And he was bound and determined to change a lot of the ruling about how the states classify weed. I'm really glad that he got bumped out of being the attorney general because that could have gone a really bad direction. I feel like we've made a lot of really progress towards reclassifying and re-establishing how we look at this product or the same, being more realistic about it, and I hope that goes forward.
It's a bloody plant, guys.
It's a plant.
Well, okay, hold on though. I always appreciate that angle, but the deal is that so is the opium plants. They're just
and
plants too.
What's the problem with that?
They are addictive, man. And they are dangerous. That's a different. Opiates are not the same as cannabinoids. It's just not the same beast.
Using them, they affect your body differently.
Yeah, and well,
however,
yes,
it's
the
still,
addictive nature
bottom line
that bothers me.
It's a plant that grows from the ground.
Well, here's my argument.
And so, for that matter, psilocybin as well, and peyote, and
psilocybin's a fungus.
Mushrooms.
Yes.
Well, it's a chemical inside of fungus.
I understand, but that's the active ingredient, right? So, and funguses just grow on their own, and so does peyote caps. I mean, those grow on their. But some of these things, I do believe that there should be some regulation because, from my experience and from seeing others and hearing stories and stuff, not everybody in this world is ready to be disconnected from the matrix. So, some
but
people
does
need
that
to stay.
mean that we need regulation?
Well, how else do you control it?
I don't think a plant needs to be controlled. I really don't. You have.
I'm with you on that one.
Your parents, your friends, your social groups that should educate you about what is available in your environment.
And that's how the indigenous cultures used to control it. You're absolutely right about that. But we can't handle our. We were just talking about.
Rather than regulation, we need education.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
I'm not going to argue with that.
Rather than trying to implement controls on these things, teach people about them and why they should or should not use them.
And how properly
Or-
they should be used if used.
Yeah, how they can be used appropriately, responsibly, or the dangers, and the dangers of their use and potential hazards. I mean, if you know what you're getting into,
I have no argument. That's
No, I mean, I look at it a lot like how Europeans look at alcohol. You know, I grew up with a buddy that was
There you
from
go. That's a good example.
that was from Ireland, sorry, and he started drinking at pubs when he was like 13. And I said, "Well, how'd you do that?" And he said, "I walked up to the pub, I sat down, I ordered a beer." And I was like, "Well, there has to be something more to that." And
yeah.
so
I
he
acted
was,
like an adult and respectful.
that was the thing. He acted respectable. When he got out of line or they thought he was looking a little drunk, they said, "Well, no more for you, 13-year-old kid."
Yep.
But as long as you were respectful about it and you weren't an idiot, it was okay. So what this did was, in the European culture, so this 13-year-old comes up and sits at the pub and orders a drink. By the time he was 15 years old, he was like, this is no big deal. It's just part of life. It's just a beverage. Yep. And that goes back to my statement from earlier. When you restrict people from something over and over and over, they just want it more and more and more. And when they get it, they go overboard.
They binge it.
and then
They
abuse
binge.
it.
How many people do you guys know? I know a bunch that turned 21 and became complete alcoholics.
That's like a rites of passage to like drink a whole lot when you turn
Until you
21.
almost die.
Yeah,
That's, you know, yeah.
If your
So you
stomach isn't
learn
getting
your-
pumped, you didn't do your
Yeah,
21st
right.
birthday right.
So so you learn your boundary on this. But I think if we took the
guess.
stigmatism out of it,
They don't even push the boundary when you take it out young like they take this the demystify it young like that.
Well, that's the
It's
thing. If you demystify it like that, then it's not a big deal, and people understand that it's just part of Earth. It's part of nature. It's a natural occurring thing.
Facet of your existence.
Exactly. So if we destigmatize it, I think we can move forward with it. And I'm hoping that what we're doing with the medical marijuana is sort of doing that. Because, you know, when I talk to a lot of, you know, I work with a lot of other artists, and most of them are a lot younger. And most of the younger artists that I deal with, they view marijuana as like, it's just weed. You know, it's not that big a deal.
the
haven't-
mentality's definitely
the
moving
mentality's
that way.
different. So they didn't grow up in a restricted, you can't touch this, don't be around this, but it's bad, blah 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 blah.
Yep.
Which made you go, well, what is that? As soon as somebody told me, you know, acid will make you crazy and freak out and you'll see all this stuff, I was like, well, let me check it out.
7
you
hits,
know?
you're clinically insane, buddy.
Right? Yeah. I was like, well,
Wait,
I wanted
really?
to know what it was.
That's no hope for you, Glenn.
So you know, as I see the younger people like looking at it, and it's a little bit more destigmatized because we're moving forward and legalizing it, they don't really care about it so much. So they're not going to indulge in it quite as heavily, and it's just becoming a part of society. It's just another thing. It's just like a beer. You know, when you're 40 years old, a beer is a beer.
Yep.
You know, and so I'm hoping that we can move to a point where a joint is just a joint. It's not that big a deal. I mean,
I think we absolutely will.
I think we absolutely will. I'm a responsible person. I'm not going to get ready to go to work and get all super high and do something. That's stupid. I got things to do.
Yeah, no shit. I would
I'm a
never
res-
get high at work.
Right?
That would make work so boring.
Oh my God, I'm a responsible adult. But when I'm home and my workday is done and my back hurts and
Yeah.
my arms hurt and my shoulder hurts,
Or I
I'm
just
like,
want to chill the hell out.
exactly. You know, I want to be able to. I feel like I should be able to. If people can take a drink of a beer and chill out and just kind of end the day and kind of relax, well, that's great. Maybe I want to smoke a joint or a bowl or whatever.
Yeah, rather than fuck up my liver
Right. You know, it's a little bit
or pop a
healthier.
Percocet.
Yeah. So I like I said, I've always felt like if we can demystify this and demonize it and open it up to more like research and things that we need to do with things, I feel like people are going to be a little bit more relaxed. We need to get rid of this mentality like my dad has. Everything, you're a doper, you're a piece of crap because you smoked a joint one time. I mean, come on.
Well, being that this started here in California, again, we lived here, so and I've only lived here, so I can't really speak for the other states and how it went down for them. But being it started in 1996, we're at 21. I can't. 23 years. 23 years.
Math is not your strong point.
No. We are 23 years now that this medical marijuana has been legal in this state. And I mean, yeah, I think we're well along those lines now of it being something more normal to be thought of, you know, and to be considered.
Well, demonizing things
yeah, that's
makes
what yeah, thank you.
it keeps people from overindulging in something,
Yes.
or like, oh, I'm gonna go get
Or
for lack of a
untabooing.
term, untabooing things and going out and getting all screwed up on something. I mean, and I think another thing too is like with older people like my dad, you're a doper. He thinks heroin and weed are the same thing.
Well, his government told him that's what the case is.
Absolutely, and that mentality really bothers me.
Oh, it's
and
the worst. It's the worst.
It's really bad.
It pisses me off, you damn sheep.
Right? And so for me, I like seeing younger people that understand that, hey, heroin is bad, weed's not that big a deal. I mean, just the rational realization of what things really are is very welcoming to me, and I hope that we can move forward with
I
that.
would even argue that heroin would have a place in some medical situations.
Well, opioids certainly do, which heroin's a derivative
Well,
of,
morphine
right?
sure does.
Right.
Yeah, and that's another opioid, right?
Right.
So, I mean, they're all refinements of so for medical things, absolutely.
I mean, when I had my hernia surgery and I woke up from the surgery, I was like, oh my God, I'm in a massive hernia. And they were like, oh, we'll give you a morphine shot. And I was like, what? And then I was passed out 2 minutes later.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was like,
much.
wow, I got morphine? I thought that was like Civil War stuff.
Well, they still carry those. It's either ketamine or morphine. They
I
carry
know.
them little things.
I thought
and
it was
then,
crazy.
oh man, what was the other one I was going to say? Now I completely lost my train of thought on that one. Ah,
Oh, well,
damn it.
it'll come back around.
It will.
Go to another train station.
Train.
You lost your train of thought.
I lost my. I'll catch you at the next on ramp. The next, yeah. Awesome. Okay, let's now discuss send a little newer situation, especially for us in California. The legalization of recreational marijuana and how has that changed society?
My pot's gotten pricier.
Okay, before we do that, in 2010,
Absolutely.
in 2010, the first states were Colorado and Washington to legalize recreational marijuana. Now there is a total of 10 states that have legalized it. How has it changed?
Do you have a list of those 10?
Unfortunately, I do not.
Okay,
I can tell you three.
Well, I know Michigan just recently did it too, which I thought Michigan would be way earlier on because if you live in the Midwest,
I don't know anything about Michigan.
Michigan is a way different place than the rest of the Midwest.
Really?
Well, yeah, they've had medical marijuana for almost as long as California has.
Wow.
And it's definitely a very progressive state in general.
Crazy.
But so 10 states have recreational.
Yep. That's what I found, and those were up to date, if I remember correctly, when I was researching. Yeah, so 10 total so far.
My question is, how many states will it take before the federal
That's
level
a great question.
says, okay, let's change
I feel like
this?
it's got to move more heavily East Coast before that happens.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if there are any states on the East Coast that have.
I'm sorry now. I wish I would have. Usually I try and refrain from making long lists of little things like that because I don't want to sit there and read them because I think people are going to, I don't need you to read a list of 30-something states, man.
No, but I think it's an interesting question because I agree with you. I think until New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Massachusetts, I think places like that. I'm pretty sure either Vermont or New Hampshire is recreational as well. But Vermont is a very progressive state. As for being a really small place, it's kind of on the California edge of being progressive.
Wow. I don't know anything about the East Coast states too much. Never been over there. Never hung out. Don't know anybody from it.
Well, Vermont and New Hampshire are so detached from the West Coast because they're way up on the top. I mean, they're further north than Toronto, so they're kind of living this like weird little zone up there. I think it's Vermont has the slogan on their license plate: "Live free or die."
Nice.
That's
like Bond, dude.
Yeah, that's actually on their license plate.
That's badass.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. All right. Those
Road
guys,
trip?
Yeah. Those guys are pretty cool. I like it.
Yeah, but to me, I keep thinking, it seems like every election, one or two states start throwing this in there. Hey, about recreational marijuana, and then the medical. But I don't know. I mean, do you feel that it has to run in an event where it has to become legal through a medical use first? Because that
seems to be how it's been. I mean, that has a heavier justification than the recreational does, I think. Now, I'm sure some states look at it like, why the hell does it need a justification, period? Let's just go straight to recreational.
Yeah.
And especially if I imagine more and more will start looking at it that way as they see it spread more and more across the country for past legalizing for recreational purposes.
Yeah.
But
I think that the move towards decriminalizing the possession is a big thing too, because there are a lot of states in the United States like Indiana, Florida. Did you know in Florida, if you are in an auto accident, per se, and say you're a mom and you're in a car accident and your kid's in the car, when you get in the car accident, they give you a blood test. to see
Wow.
if you're on alcohol or anything. And if they find that you have any traces of marijuana, they can take your kid away.
Wow.
So we still live in a country that has laws like that.
They have on-site blood tests?
Yeah.
I didn't even know they could do that. Do
Yeah,
they do that here?
If they blood test you in Florida from a car accident, because they want to know if you're on an opiate
Sure.
or if you're on alcohol or anything that they don't know, just detect
Yeah.
to see what was the root of the accident. But if they find traces of marijuana on you, they can take your kids into custody.
I wonder how far back they look too, right? Because I mean, the marijuana can stay in your system a lot longer than you'd be high.
That's true.
I mean, you could. Hey, I smoked last week. Well, sorry, it was in your blood, buddy.
Up to 3 months.
3 months,
90
and then
days.
hair is like 7 years, I
Oh, yeah,
heard, or
yeah.
something stupid like that.
But I think the tipping point is going to be when states like Texas or
Yes.
Florida, when
Yeah.
they do, because I don't think either one of those states have medical at
don't
this
know.
point. I'm pretty sure they don't. Florida is really heavy on drugs in general, but it's also, you got to remember too, Florida's a state that has to deal with cocaine being
Yeah.
pulled in boats, constantly. I mean, I lived in Dade County for a little while when I was younger, going to school and going to college in Florida, and Florida has a way different situation with drugs than the most of the rest of the country does. I mean, I think in California and Arizona, we probably have that too because of drugs coming in from Mexico.
Yep.
But you also have, in Florida, you have all this stuff coming in from boats from like
Cuba.
and all over the place. So there's a little different story. So Florida is a different country almost in some regards, But I think the tipping point will be when you get either medical marijuana or recreational marijuana in like a place like Texas.
Yeah.
I don't see how the rest of the country cannot follow suit when someone like that says.
I don't see
yeah.
how they can't follow suit with the amount of money that's made from the taxes. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah,
I've
but
been-
I think some people, especially when it comes to politics, old white politicians, they're like, I don't care about that money. This is the devil's, lettuce,
We're rich anyway.
right?
The devil's lettuce. Is it iceberg?
So legalize it federally
Romaine.
and let states prohibit it if they want it.
Yeah.
Or if they want.
Well, it's interesting
And that'll
too.
happen too, right? I mean,
Yeah,
some
it's-
states will do that.
Well, it's interesting too because we talked about the Schedule 1 thing. I think I've always felt like the biggest barrier that legalizing marijuana or recreational marijuana has is that Schedule 1 status. I mean, if at a federal level it's a Schedule 1 drug, it's the same in their eyes, and the federal government's the same as heroin,
Crack.
cocaine, crack.
Yeah.
And if you know anything about drugs, marijuana is nothing like crack. And if you don't, I'm telling you, marijuana is nothing like crack.
If you don't, please smoke marijuana and find out for yourself.
Try both of them and then
Try
tell me
both.
what you think. I'll be waiting for your report.
Yes, you heard it here, right here on The Great Distraction. Thomas has just suggested you guys all go out and try crack.
And then tell me what the difference is.
Well, if you survive after your crack endeavor, I mean, you can tell us about marijuana. and
Warning.
Yeah,
You
warning.
might not be the same afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, don't do that. Definitely, though.
Unless you really want to.
Yeah.
Unless you...
I'm not going to tell you what to do.
yeah, well...
I won't tell you what not to do either.
was that Wolf of Wall Street when they... he gives them crack the first time after they party. He makes that big sale or whatever the hell he did. Yeah, that's just random. Just smoke crack here. Try this like that. Oh, man.
Remind me when we're off air to tell you the story about being on tour in Charlotte.
Oh, jeez. Awesome.
All I can say is Waffle House, crack, 5 a.m. I didn't do it,
I imagine that's often when crack is
but
done.
it was there and it was available.
Wow.
Is that like saying you didn't inhale?
Did you?
I didn't even go in the room.
Yeah, oof. I never had an
But
interest
I,
to
but
try
I think
that
that's one of the biggest arguments too. Is a lot of people, like I was saying before, and I always bring up the issue of like my dad, where there's a lot of people in this country who say the same thing over and over. Oh, you're a doper. As soon as I hear the word doper, I'm like, okay, you were born in the 30s, right?
stuff. Yeah. You're ignorant. You're shut down. I don't even know if I can help you.
And I think that, again, that stigmatism of like this grouping things into something to you believe Nancy Reagan, you believe Nixon, you believe all these people who told you drugs are bad, okay? Yeah, drugs are bad, okay. You know what the worst ones are? The ones that come from Eli Lilly. Or all these other pharmaceutical companies. I can smoke a little bit of weed and my back doesn't hurt and I can relax
hope
and enjoy, but if I take some of these drugs, my urine turns blue and I'm going to have headaches and suicidal thoughts.
I hope that the general population, and I don't have much faith in them, but I hope that the general population, as a populace, is putting two and two together and seeing that and identifying that we have a massive massive opioid death problem. It is one of the biggest problems in this country. It is one of the biggest killers in this country. People are addicted to these pharmaceutical opiates that are now moving straight on to heroin, and that has driven heroin prices completely down, so everybody and their mom can afford it now. And we've got all kinds of people dying because of it.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to look at gateway drugs, look at big pharmaceutical.
Yeah, nobody is
Those
dying.
are gateway drugs.
Yeah, nobody is
when,
dying
when you
from
have
weed.
people crushing Vicodin to snort it,
Yeah.
that's a gateway drug.
Yep.
I mean, come on.
But the weed isn't killing anybody.
No.
And I'm hoping that that if they're putting those two things together, okay, pharmaceutical drug bad, pharmaceutical company not do anything about it, weed never kill nobody. Wait a minute, what's going on here?
Right.
You know, they're obviously you've been lied to.
Yeah, I mean, just the side effects. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have a TV on once in a while at 2:00 in the morning because I'm awake at that time, and there's all these crazy commercials for these drugs. Oh, do you have anxiety? Well, take this, and then the side effects are like, bleeding of the anus, bleeding of the eyes, suicidal thoughts.
Oh, that's my favorite, yes.
Pancreas shutting down, liver disorder. I'm like, really?
Depression.
So, depression. So a drug to help depression makes you suicidal and makes your pancreas bleed,
Anal bleeding.
right? And so yeah, I'm like, oh, I don't feel depressed all the time anymore, just part of the time, only when my anus is bleeding.
Yep. God.
Welcome to big pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, I hope it never happens, but it probably will. At some point, the pharmaceutical companies are going to get a hold of refined THC. And you're going to see some sort of one night you'll be up at 3 a.m. and you're going to be watching some infomercial on some THC-based medication that's going to run along the lines of anal bleeding and, your eyes getting red and puffy combined. And it's going to be, from a marijuana-based, a THC-based drug.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping like DMT studies and stuff can increase.
Yeah.
Because I mean,
I'll sign me up.
right? I mean, because we've already got the big pharmaceutical companies pumping all these horrible things, have these horrible things, and we're getting very little research. But DMT is being used for post-traumatic syndrome and all this other kind of stuff. And I mean,
MDMA too.
MDMA, and so I don't know. I feel like there's got to be a breaking point where people just say, look, we want to try these things. We want to allow testing to be done for these other things because we want an alternative here.
I think another thing a lot of people don't realize is that, for example, I'll give a better example here. It just popped into my head. There are versions of LSD that do not have a psychoactive property to them. You take these and they do not make you trip. However, they are a chemical that you can take for specific ailments. And there is, if I remember correctly, there is one type of migraine that is considered to be one of the worst. It's called a cluster migraine, if I remember correctly. And I mean, if you're bored or if you get migraines and you think they're terrible, do some YouTube searching or Googling for cluster migraines, and you'll be thankful that you don't get those. It's to the effect that people are like slamming their heads against the wall trying to knock themselves out to deal with these things after they've been locked in a padded room because they just can't deal with reality anymore because this migraine is so bad. Apparently, there is a flavor of this non-psychoactive LSD that they can take that is one of the only alleviating substances for this type of migraine. They would never have found that or known about it or even come close to finding it had they never started doing testing with something that was given a bad name. So when you don't support and actively get pissed that they are not allowed to research all of these drugs, that is the kind of stuff that you are shutting down the possibility of finding. We have no idea the extent or even just right off the right next to, so to speak, that we can discover from researching these drugs. It could be anything. It could be the cure for cancer or 15 different types of cancer. We don't know. And by not testing, by not allowing the research to be done, we're only hurting ourselves.
Yeah, and I think, again, going back to the situation with the Schedule I situation with marijuana, and we talk about all those other things, like any of the, a lot of these other drugs, and until we can like legally be able to test some of these things. And again, you have to understand that all of these are controlled. Big Pharmaceutical is not going to step back and go, you know what, do whatever you want, come up with a better cure than we have.
Nope.
Because sick people are money.
Yep.
And that's where the profit is. So if you can supply something that isn't as expensive, or remember the whole issue with the whole EpiPen recently?
No, what happened?
Well, this guy bought the patent to it or whatever, and the EpiPen they went on to charge like $600 or $800.
Oh, yes, I did hear about
Remember
that. Way over here, skyrocketed the price because he owned it like a monopoly on it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's going on in all these major pharmaceutical companies with these drugs. I mean, if you don't know this, there are elderly communities in places like Arizona that take buses and they go to Mexico and they buy their prescription drugs
And receive medical care from like holistic type thing. Yes, you're absolutely
Absolutely.
right. I know people have done that.
People do it all the time. So what's a horrible thing is in America, let's say somebody comes up with a drug and it helps your blood pressure or something like this. They go, okay, well, 30 pills are going to cost you $600 a month, and you have to have them to live because it helps your blood pressure, or you may die. That drug that's being sold for $600 in America, you can go to Canada, you can go to Mexico, and you can buy a bottle of 30 of those for $40. So you have to wake up at some point and realize that there's a giant scam going on in the medical world that is doing nothing but hurting people who need medications. I mean, you have a lot of elderly people who are living on budgets, Social Security or whatever, and all of a sudden their EpiPen is $900. I mean, what kind of scam is that?
Yep.
And it's all about greed. So the introduction of an alternative medication
That you can grow in your backyard.
that you can grow in your backyard or do something with, or even just making things more affordable. The first time I went to Mexico with a friend of mine, and I'm not condoning this in any way, shape, or form. I'm just relaying a story that happened. We got out of the plane. We're going to our hotel in Mexico, and he goes, "I want to stop at a drugstore." Why do you want to stop at a drugstore? He's like, "Oh, I can get a bottle of 60 Vicodin for
whoa.
$20." And I was
Wow.
like, "What?" And I didn't understand that. That was my first introduction to like medications and things like that being sold at different rates for different countries. In America, we have such a scam in our medical facilities, our medical world, our insurance, everything else, that they're just raping us for everything, for medical care, for drugs, everything they can, because they can.
Yep.
They've lobbied themselves into that. And that's one of the problems that I think marijuana has, because you've got so many years of lobbying in from all these major pharmaceutical companies that they don't want this involved in anything because that cuts into their profits unless they can control it.
Yeah.
But doesn't it
financially and thus financially benefit?
absolutely? But doesn't it seem really stupid that that if you have to buy a Vicodin in America, I'm just giving you a number. A Vicodin is $2 a pill, and you can go to Mexico and buy it for 25 cents.
Yeah.
It's just right across. If you live in California like we do, you can drive there, which is what people are doing in places like Arizona. And there are tours that are doing that to get elderly people to be able to buy affordable medications on their prescriptions. So, I mean, it's a giant scam. So, I mean, we have to stand up and say, look, let's bring some reality into our medications. And, as far as I'm concerned, marijuana is one of the things that has an enormous amount of usages that we need to like destigmatize this thing and go, look, can we research this? Can we look at the advantages of this? And there are other drugs in the same category.
Yep. Yeah, and they're only finding more and more, and and that window of expansion is only continuing and encompassing more and more opportunities. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Never should have gone down this path, but
But hey, what about that Reefer Madness movie?
half baked.
It makes you rape white women, and then that becomes a problem,
Oh man, that's funny. I forgot about that.
right?
So, effects that you've seen on society, be it personal or around you, since recreational marijuana became legal. I don't think Glenn.
I think
already
Glenn
spat
nailed
it
it.
out. Yeah, I haven't
kinda
seen
nailed it.
anything. Like we've had recreational marijuana now for when the hell did it become?
Almost a year.
Almost a year.
I can get pot delivered to my house.
I mean, yeah,
Right.
there's billboards. For those that aren't in California, there's billboards now that say, have pot delivered. Like you have, what's the services that deliver your food?
Like DoorDash.
DoorDash, yeah.
DoorDash,
There's
yeah.
like Weed Dash, if you will, where people will go to the dispensary, pick up your stuff, go to your house, and drop off your weed. That's cool, I guess. If you have to have your weed delivered to your freaking house by hand. It's kind of weird, but whatever.
Well, there are some cities that have restrictions
I was
on
just going to say that.
where they can have a dispensary. So
Yeah.
if you
Some don't want them in there at all.
right. So if you live in one of these cities that doesn't have any local dispensaries,
That's a good point.
They can still deliver them to you.
Yeah,
if
I live
they're
in a city
based-
that doesn't want one. Like
Right.
my whole county doesn't want one.
Right.
Doesn't want any dispensaries.
What county is this?
Placer.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think Placer wants anything to do. I don't think there are any dispensaries. I could be wrong. I haven't gone looking for them, but I don't think there are any dispensaries in Placer County at all. Not that that matters to anybody listening, but whatever. In our county, my county here. Yeah. So there has definitely been some backlash, but as far as that goes, but as far as like walking down the street, I guess some people imagine that people would just be getting high walking down the street. I have seen people smoking weed like walking down the street or whatever. It's kind of treated. Oh, well, we don't really know, to be honest, but it's supposedly it's supposed to be treated just like drinking in public. You're not really, and again, this varies by state, varies by, I don't know, maybe even city or county or whatever. But here in California, you're not supposed to be walking down the street with an exposed bottle drinking alcohol. You're not supposed to be drinking alcohol outside, period. They don't want us to do that. That's why we go to Vegas, because Vegas is awesome like that. And I've never gotten myself in trouble either, I want to add, openly drinking and getting completely plastered in Vegas. I just want to do it outside in the cool air. Nevertheless, we can't do that here in California. So one of the things that I don't think we're supposed to be doing either is really smoking weed outside. However, weed comes in so many different forms and flavors that, I mean, your little vape pen could be vape, could be weed. Who's going to know the difference? And nobody's going to mess with you.
Well, and that's one thing I noticed a couple of years ago. I went out for Halloween, and everybody had the vape pen.
Yeah.
They were vaping, like not weed, but vaping.
Yeah.
And I had a vape pen, a weed vape pen, and I was like, I'm in this bar and I'm looking around. I'm like, well, what's the difference?
Yeah, no, yeah. If you
it doesn't smell. It doesn't anything.
Yeah, that's another kind of cool thing too. Is I mean, you can usually tell because the vapors are pulling out those freaking big old boxes and blowing huge, annoying clouds of
It's like
smoke.
as big as their fist.
Yeah, that fucking smells like cherries and watermelon puke or something like that. I don't know. And then the ones that are actually trying to get high, they always pull out this thing that looks like a freaking
It's
pen.
super stealth. It's
tiny.
a little
yeah,
pen.
they take a little hit, and what they puff out, you don't even see. If you're standing right next to them and they blow it in your face, you might smell some flavor of something, weedy.
Yeah.
But there's a big difference as far as that goes. So you'll see that sometimes inside. I mean, I've seen people do it.
But I mean, for me, like the legalization of marijuana, I'm like, recreational. I'm like, that's great. I believe that it should be treated like alcohol. Yeah. I'm not going to drive down the street smoking a joint.
That's exactly. Follow the same rules.
Exactly. For me, I'm not going to drive. I'm a responsible adult. Yeah. I'm not going to drive down the street with an open container. I'm doing shots. I'm on the 5. I'm not going to do that.
Damn.
I mean, come
it's
on.
just not a good idea.
It's not a good idea. So I'm not going to do that with weed either.
Yeah.
And I think that a large percentage of people are like me. You're like, yeah, I'm. That's great. I can.
Responsible adult.
We're responsible adults. Yeah, I can smoke weed. Yeah, let me get some and go home and hang out and chill out and watch some Rick and Morty and smoke a joint.
Yeah, you're either going to have a couple shots or smoke a joint. I mean, what the hell?
Yeah, and I mean, come on. If you look at the comparison, alcohol has hurt way more people than weed has ever even thought about hurting.
Yeah, I kind of refrain from including a lot of that type of stuff in this conversation.
There's no comparison.
There's no comparison.
Nobody has ever actually died from marijuana. There's no such thing as an overdose. I mean, your body can hit a level of toxicity, but before you ever get anywhere near that, you'll be passed on the ground asleep. Yeah,
but
or have eaten yourself into a coma because.
Yeah. Well, to me, when people use this argument of like, "Oh, weed's a gateway drug," I'm like, alcohol is the gateway drug.
Yeah.
And here's my reason to say that. If you get drunk or you get all whacked out, or you get doing a bunch of shots and stuff, you will do anything.
I can't tell you the number of times that I've woken up with a pack of cigarettes in my pocket after a night of drinking.
And you don't even remember where you got them.
Yeah.
Nope.
Right? Yeah, I'm telling you right now, when it comes to gateway drugs, alcohol is it, dude.
Yeah.
I will go to my grave feeling that way.
Every time I hear the term that marijuana is a gateway drug, I kind of thought, I see some irony in where we are now, and it makes me laugh because we're kind of looking at trying to look at a different
It's
angle.
the gateway to the ending prohibition.
That's right. It ended up being the government's gateway drug to legalizing. Because once that started getting more socially acceptable, we started hearing the first thing I started hearing about was the PTSD stuff, which we already mentioned.
Yeah, psilocybin.
And MDMA. Big time research doing it. And all of a sudden, oh wow, this stuff is actually working. It's helping our damaged soldiers that are coming back with this horrible effect. And what I was like, no shit.
Right.
I mean, do you know how long the Indians were using this to get off alcoholism or other ailments, depression, all kinds of stuff? I mean, it's been there all along. And only now you're thinking about, but it's funny because the medical marijuana opened the gateway for legalizing other substances. It's only a matter of time before psilocybin and MDMA, in my opinion, are starting to be, or will start to becoming legal as well. And it's just, that will be the true gateway drug. They were right.
Yeah.
all along.
And for me, I mean, and that's another thing too, when you bring in those components of this topic, if you can help, disabled veterans,
Yeah, what
Dude,
the
I'm all
hell?
for it. I mean,
now you're anti-patriotic. You're I don't know how to say that. You're not a
You're
patriot.
unpatriotic. Unpatriotic.
If you don't support the legalization of marijuana.
Yeah, I mean, come on. I mean, as in my opinion, the government craps on veterans all the time. And if you're a veteran out there, dude, thank you, and you're awesome. And I wish that the government would take better care of you. But most veterans I know that come back with a little bit of problem here and there, they end up being alcoholics.
Yeah.
Or they destroy their lives. If there's another option for them, come on. Let's take care of our people here.
I just rewatched Rambo: First Blood the other night.
And
that ending was so sad, dude. It was terrible. After he gets done like murdering tons of people, he didn't actually kill a lot of them. Anyway, that was horrible. That movie was PTSD all over the place.
Yeah. If you see Rambo in your neighborhood, give him a joint.
And be nice to him because he'll mess you up, dude.
Don't draw first blood, man.
No,
don't draw first blood.
On that note, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next time. Show notes and other info can be found at our website, greatdistraction.com. The Great Distraction is listed in iTunes, and we greatly appreciate it when our listeners take the time to look us up and leave us a 5-star rating and review. That helps our show grow and motivates us to continue producing content. If you'd like to get in contact with us, you can do so using the email address, greatdistractionpodcast@gmail.com, or via our website. We're always interested in hearing any thoughts, comments, or questions from our listeners. Keeping up on the latest from us can be done in several different ways. You can add us to your favorite RSS feed tracker. The link is available on our website or in iTunes. Or you can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Great Distraction, one word, no space. As always, thank you for listening, and thank you for all the support.